This video is for those that have wanted a realistic, true-to-scale working wall switch for every room of the dollhouse. This is the model board that I've put together to show you how it will work. I've got the small switch, which is really the most realistic size switch, being a 1-inch scale for the dollhouse. I have two lights at the top of the board. This could be the ceiling light in one room. This could be the ceiling light in another room. If I throw the one switch on the right side, the right light comes on. If we throw the little switch on the other side, the left switch or the left light comes on. That's basically all we're going to be doing in this video. The hard part is not learning how to wire this into the dollhouse. It's how to conceal all of the wiring and how to mount this on the wall with the least amount of damage to the wall itself. I installed my first set of these miniature wall switches, known as dip switches, in the dollhouse I made for my daughter 40 years ago. 5 years ago, I added an addition to that dollhouse for my granddaughter and was really pleased to see that all of the original wall switches still worked. This video is very different from my previous ones, and I have been looking forward to making it for some time. Although the process of wiring a light switch into each room is not difficult to understand, it requires some additional skills and patience to place and to install each switch. I would rate this as needing an intermediate level of skills to complete. If you decide you want to give these dip switches a try, you will have a full sheet of instructions provided along with the switches. I have both single and double dip switches available on my website. As we get started, I will be showing you how I have overcome the problem of running wires up a wall. This procedure I will be doing can be used when attaching wall sconces too. I taught myself how to drill a hole through the center edge of a plywood wall or floor and then fish the wires to where the light or switch needs to be. Most will prefer cutting a groove in the wall, and that's okay too. We will be demonstrating both ways. To get started, let's take a look at how these switches need to be wired into the 12 volts of the dollhouse. We will then spend the rest of the video on the more difficult aspect of how to install the tiny switches, and more so how to conceal all of the wiring. As I said in my intro, the easiest thing to understand is how a switch is wired, but it surprises me the number of people that have a little bit of problem just installing a switch. So we've got a chart here that we can show you exactly how the switches are wired. It'll only take a few minutes to explain this, and then we'll get it right into the wiring in the dollhouse itself. The simplest way to light a light bulb or any chandelier or lamp that's in your dollhouse is to take the two wires that come from that light and touch them to the two poles of a power source, such as the power supply that you have wiring the dollhouse. There are only two wires that come from the power source, and there's two wires that come from the lamp. You put one wire on each of the terminals of the power source and the light will come on if you've got the power source plugged in. The switch is just an interrupter of one of those wires. I always wire the switch on the positive side of the circuit. So we'll wire our switch on the red side of the wiring that we have in the dollhouse. Any light that you have that you want to put a switch on, let's say that it's the bedroom ceiling light that we want to put a switch on, go ahead and mount that ceiling light. You'll have two wires coming off of the back. If it's an incandescent bulb, they're normally white wires. One of those wires is going to connect to the ground or to the negative side of your circuit. And you can connect that wire anywhere in the dollhouse. So take one of the wires from your light and connect it to a black wire that's live in the dollhouse. The second wire you want to bring down to the switch. and you'll solder that second lead to one of the terminals on the switch. The other terminal of the switch then will come back to the positive side of your circuit. Looking at this chart here, you can see exactly what I just said. If we have our power source here, we have a 9-volt battery that we're talking about. If we take the power source and we want to light our light bulb, we take one of the two wires from the light bulb. This one is the black one that I show on here. Come around and connect it to the negative side of the battery. Or if it's an incandescent light, it makes no difference which wire goes on which terminal. But if we're using LEDs, we have to watch the polarity. So I'm going to use this as if everything is wired with our red and the black that I discuss all the way through all of these videos. So our one wire, which is the negative side, connects to the negative side of the battery. If we take the second lead coming from the light and connect it to the positive side of the battery, the light bulb's going to light. That's the simplest thing for wiring it. If we want to break the circuit by disconnecting our lead on here, that'll turn the light off. That's all that a switch does. If we put the switch in series with the red wire, so our terminal is going through the switch, or this lead that's coming up here is going through the switch. So from the power supply, we have a red lead that's going to one terminal on the switch, and coming off of the other side of the switch goes to the light. When you push the button on the light switch, the light's going to come on. Push it again, and it breaks that circuit so the light turns off. That's all there is to doing the electrical for the dollhouse. Let's look at it with our little dip switches that we're going to be putting in. Here's one of the dip switches. You can see how small it actually is. If you look at the back of it, we have 4 terminals for connecting our wires to. This is that dip switch. These are the 4 terminals. The bottom one, you're going to connect them together. This is your power source that's going to the switch, and then going through each of the 2 switches here, we have a single connection of a wire depending on which light that we want to light. So the one wire is going to room 1. The second terminal here is going to room 2. Otherwise, it's exactly what we showed on the first drawing. Our ground is over here on the black coming from the power supply. And this could be your black lead anywhere in the dollhouse. So you're going to connect both of one of the leads of both lamps to the ground, the closest ground that you can find where the light is in the dollhouse. The second wire has to come back to the switch. And if you want this light to be turned on by the second switch, you would connect it to this tab. If you want this one to be on the first switch, you connect it to that tab. Then when the power supply is plugged into the wall, when you throw up the switch to on, it's going to complete the circuit from the bottom through the switch over to the light, and the light comes on. That's all there is to it. The hardest part is going to be wiring it into the dollhouse, and that's our next step. I think the first thing we'll do is take a look at the sample that I put together as to what we're trying to accomplish. There's our little dip switch, and it has the 2 individual switches that are on there. I prefer putting the double wall switch into the rooms, but there are times where you might want to use a single switch, and I have both of those available for you. This would be the ceiling light in one of the rooms. This would be the ceiling light in the other room. However, when we get into the dollhouse itself, we're going to be wiring one of the switches for the ceiling light and the other switch for the baseboard outlets, so that any table lamp or floor lamp that you would have plugged in would come on with the switch to the right. We need to determine where we're going to position the light, and as we switch over to the dollhouse itself, we'll actually mount them where we need them to be. But this is one that's already been mounted. What we accomplish is that when we throw up the switch on the right light comes on. When we throw the switch on the left light comes on. And these are really individual, very, very small toggle switches that work very, very well. And as I explained in the introduction, I put them in my daughter's dollhouse some 50 years ago, and they still work. You don't want to put too much of a load on here, so just one room is about all you can do with the individual switch. I think it's rated for about an amp of current through that individual switch. The wiring itself, if we look at the strips that are on here, this could be the wiring that you're running in the dollhouse. This could be a floor strip that you have anywhere that you have power. You have the two wires that come from the light. One side of that light will be connected to the black lead, and the closest power black that you have in the dollhouse. The other side has to come over to the switch. And what I have done is I've drilled holes in the wall. We've glued that switch to the wall, and then the wires that come from that switch are down this groove that we put into the opposite side of the wall. And the main one, which would be the bottom red wire that goes over the two tabs at the bottom of the switch, is connected to the power strip that you have. This would be the power connector that the transformer is plugged into, or the power supply in our case. And we have the red and the black strip that's down here, and this is live. So the black on these runs here is connected directly to the black on here. And then the two wires that were from the top of the switch that regulate which light's going to come on are coming down and being wired on the red side of here, so that when you throw the switch, it's shorting between here down to whichever switch you turned on, going to that lead, which is the other side of the wire. I actually soldered them on the front here, so you could see what I was doing a little bit. Now we're going to go ahead and go to the dollhouse, and we'll show you on the first floor here. We're going to start from scratch, and then I'm going to move up to the second floor where I've actually done some of the drilling and have several things set up to make it go a little bit faster. We want to put a light switch to the right of the doorway. Normally you would have the switch just over to the side of the casing of the door. I'm going to take the door out of here because we want to do it without the door frame being in there. I want to first measure up 4 inches. So I can take a ruler and we'll make a mark at 4 inches on the top here. I'll then take my square and I'll draw a line directly across. You can see I've already drawn it on there. And then I would want to go approximately 1 inch from the edge of the door here, or a little bit less. So depending on how close you want it to the frame itself. Since the frame is about 1/2 of an inch, I would go maybe 3/4 of an inch to an inch, no more than an inch. And I'm going to mark this actually at about 3/4, and I'll show you why I changed it from the 1-inch mark to the 3/4. Once you have it lined up where you want to put it, take one of the little switches and set it in place so that it's centered on that 4-inch line. And then make a little mark at the top and at the bottom. And then we'll come across here and draw that line where that switch goes. It's close enough. And then we want to do a vertical where we put the mark at the center here, and I'll use my square on the floor and come across this way. I then want to drill a 1/8 inch hole at this position and at this position. And I'm going to end up putting a switch on the other side of the wall also, so we can drill straight through and use that same hole to be able to fish our wires. And I'll take our Dremel with an 1/8 inch drill in it. And I'll line it up. That'll give us the 2 holes that the wires that will be on this switch will go in there, and then we can glue that switch right onto the wall, and it'll be nice and flush, and it will work extremely well. There's enough room in the wall for us to be able to put another one from the other side. The next thing that we need to do is we need to determine what we're doing with that switch. And we're going to have the switch on the left turn the ceiling light switch on, or the ceiling light on with that switch. And on the other side, we're going to wire the baseboard outlet that we have down here. So we want this outlet to come on with the right side of the switch. So we need to kind of determine how much wire we need as leads on the individual switch. The next thing that I have to do is, in the original directions and on the board that I have here, we routed out a path on the opposite side of the wall. But I'm actually going to have another wall switch on this side as well as on this side. And I have found an easy way to be able to drill a hole in the edge of the plywood on here. And what I use is the little finger drills that you can get from Micromart. And I can line up exactly on here where I want to go. And you can see that the reason that I moved this to 3/4 of an inch from the wall there is that that's almost the exact same depth as we have on this finger drill. I can line up right in the center here, and I can just start turning this. I've already pre-done this just to make things go a little bit faster, but it isn't difficult to do. Make sure that you keep it straight and that you work it slowly so that you're not going up or down on this, and you keep it parallel to the floor. And you can find that you go right back and go until you hit the collar that's on that bit there, and we're right in the center. Now, a number of times I would go ahead and I would do that drill hole first before putting in these in case I got a little bit out of alignment. And we'll show you that when we get upstairs on the other floor because I did it a little bit differently. But the easy way to find whether you're lined up is to take a magnet, and a rare earth magnet will catch you how far you are. Now, I'm far enough that I'm past those holes. But when you can see it actually pulls itself right back to the end of that drill. And I know that I'm pretty much in line with it. This actually falls down just a little bit from being centered on that, but we're right smack in the middle on there. There, we got it. And that's how I determine where the drill is in the wall. Now I want to take my other bit, and this is a fishtail cutter, and we'll put that in our Dremel. And I want to bring the edge of this wall of the two 1/8-inch holes that we had, I want to join the two of them from top to bottom. Now we need to determine whether our hole is all the way through there, and I'm just going to take a piece of wire and see if I can catch it in there. We can put our drill back in here, and I can see it right there. So I can fish a wire through here. Now I can do all of my wiring down the door frame, and I'll put in the different wires from the switch, feed them out into this area here, and then when you're done with your wiring, your door frame will go right back in there, and it'll cover up all of the wiring that you have. Now, what I've done with the piece of wire is I use it to fish the wires from the switch itself. So I'm going to have 3 different pieces of wire that I'm going to fish into that area there, and I'm going to solder to the ends of those and then pull them through so that I have all of the different leads. Another little trick, and we're going to prepare the individual switches. I make the one that is doubled on here, where I have the 2 of them soldered together. That lead should be longer than the other 2 leads that are in there, so that you know which one is your common connection on the switch. Let's go upstairs now, where I've done a little bit more work, and we'll actually solder in and fish the wires for each of the switches and talk a little bit more about what we need to do. Before we do that, I'm going to solder wire leads on to the individual switches. Okay, I predetermined how long the individual wire leads need to be that are going to be put on the little dip switch. And now we need to solder them onto the dip switch. For the bottom ones, we're going to take the longest wire and we're going to wrap that around the 2 posts that come off of here. And I'll just use my long nose pliers and give it a little bit of a wrap on here. And then pinch them together. Push it down to the bottom of the tabs. If you notice, I have it being held in a small vise, which really helps for being able to do it. We'll get my soldering iron, clean the tip on it, add a little bit of solder to the tip. Make sure that it's tinned and it's clean. You can see I'm nice and clean on the tip, and that the solder actually forms a little bead right at the tip of it. I'm going to come back to the back side of this, introduce the heat of the iron, and then to the front, and it melts and flows right over those wires that I wrapped on there, and we're good and tight. Clean the iron, set it back down here. I'm going to take my snippers and snip this little end off here. So we're good and clean, and we've got the long wire soldered on there. Show you a little trick for doing the other two, because those will be the independent switches that go to the two different areas that we want to switch on and off. This is a wire wrapper, and I can put the wire in the end of this and then stick it on to the pin that's on there and just twist. And that wraps it right onto the post. Tighten my vise up a little bit. Take the other one and put it in there. Come down over the post and twist. We've got both of those twisted on there. Go back and get my soldering iron, clean the tip, put new solder right at the tip. We'll do one at a time. I'm going to do the one on your left and just introduce the solder, and it goes right on. Introduce it on this one and give it a little bit of a coating of solder, and all of those are nicely tight. As you can see, we now have our switch, and on the bottom side of the switch, it has the 1 and the 2 on the bottom, we have the common wire coming out, and then we have the 2 reds coming off of the top of the switch. Now we need to take our switch and connect it into the dollhouse.